Hey, so as I mentioned, this is week 3 of a 6-week series, and you can tune into any or all of the following weeks that we have listed here. And the structure of our presentation is going to be about a 20-minute discussion between me and Melissa, who will be leading it with me. And then at the end, we'll do a 15-minute Q&A. So we're going to record the presentation just like Dr. Pudana said, but we'll definitely turn it off just once again to reiterate at the end to make sure that everything that we discuss stays confidential. Okay, and this is a plug for the other programming that CARD offers. Definitely what may be interest to some of you who are attending today will be the mental health support group for parents, but we're happy to talk about any of these opportunities at the end of our talk today. Okay, so today we're going to be covering the basics of conversation, which includes both verbal and nonverbal behaviors. Verbal communication being how we communicate with others using our words, and nonverbal communication being how we communicate with others using our body language. We'll begin by talking about the importance of trading information and sharing the conversation, as well as listening and staying on topic. And then Melissa is going to talk a little bit more about whole body listening, maintaining eye contact, and the importance of tone in conversation. And at the end, we may have some time to practice some of the things that we talk about today. Okay, so before children carry a conversation, they need to learn how to do so. And every time we have a back and forth conversation, there are certain rules that we abide by. And the first thing that we want to do is review these 4 rules. The first is that every conversation involves trading information. When we have a back and forth, the first thing that we want to do is give an important fact and get an important fact. Similarly, when we answer a question, to keep the conversation going, we might need to ask a question too. And 3, when kids have conversations, we want to make sure that what the information they're sharing is not too personal. So we want to make sure they know when they give information, they want to make sure they share things that don't make others too uncomfortable. And what can be really helpful for kids is having a conversation beforehand with them about the types of information that they can share with certain audiences. So the types of information that may be appropriate to talk about with friends and family versus less appropriate for strangers or teachers. And we may need to teach kids specifically what too personal means, especially because they may not have such a great understanding of this concept. One strategy that can be particularly helpful to have children understand how to begin and how to maintain a conversation is using the green zone. And that's basically a Venn diagram of 2 circles, where one circle represents their interests and another circle represents their conversational partner's interest, so another child's interest. And the overlap represents the information that both children share together, which may be particularly good topics of conversation. And we definitely have more resources on this for parents who are interested that we can talk more about during the Q&A session. It can also be helpful for children to have conversation starters. So these provide cues for them to use when they begin conversations. And visual cues can be particularly helpful. So practicing conversations with children can involve role plays. And one thing you can do is take conversational cues like this, cut them out and have them around you. And that way children know that these may be particular things that I can ask as a way of getting information from another child. So these include things like, what do you like? What don't you like? How did you do that? What do you think about this? They may be particularly useful conversation starters. The second rule of maintaining good conversations is that the conversation needs to be shared. So sharing means that you take up equal amounts of the conversation, where you don't talk too much and you don't talk too little. It's also important that children are not the interviewer, so they're not constantly repeating questions and not only just talking about themselves, but letting the other person talk too. It can be really helpful to review these rules with kids as you practice role plays. And the last thing that can be helpful to teach kids is trying not to interrupt and listening for pauses in the conversation. One strategy that can be particularly helpful in teaching kids how to share a conversation is the conversation circle. So this is a circle that children can use after a conversation to reflect on how that conversation went. So you can think of an entire circle as a conversation, and kids can map out how much of it they took up versus how much of it their conversational partner took up. And they can also rate how well they listened, or if they had an easier time listening. And it can be really helpful to practice with parents doing this activity or practice with family members before doing it with other children their age. The third rule of conversations is that conversations, you need to listen. Listening has several benefits. It shows waiting your turn shows that you're really caring about the person that you're speaking with. It gives us a better understanding of how to respond to the person that we're talking to. So it's a little bit more insight into what they may be thinking or what they may be feeling. And last, listening is respectful. And it's important to listen to others so that they listen to us when we're talking. And the last rule about having a good conversation is to stay on topic. Staying on topic allows you to share the information that you know, and it also allows you to learn information that others share with you. But it's also important that kids learn how to remain flexible. So to keep the conversation going, they may need to move on to new topics. And it may be important for them to jump between topics, but trying to find a balance between doing so and not doing so too quickly can be difficult. Waiting and listening for pauses in the conversation may be a good signal to figure out, this may be a good time to change topic here, or it may be okay to change topic here. So I talked about a few different skills, and some of these skills require a lot of different steps, as you've noticed. And it may take kids some extra time to fully understand each topic or each rule. So it's really important that we remain patient when teaching little ones how to do these things. And there are some ways to encourage positive conversations with your child. So one thing that you can do is that you can praise your child in private when he or she attempts to use one of the new skills that they've been learning instead of in a group. Talking to your child about their faults in front of others can be particularly harsh for them or hard for them. You can also involve your child in teamwork. So involve them in decisions about his or her play dates and make them together. So that way we're setting them up for success and they have opportunities to practice with people that they enjoy meeting with and enjoy being around. The third thing that you can do is you can model what it means to talk respectfully towards others by doing so and setting a good example by speaking respectfully with other adults, with teachers, or other children in front of your child. And the last thing that you can do is you can listen when your child wants to talk about his or her friendships or any difficulties that they're having when they're making friends. And all of these skills involve practice. They don't come easy. And it really involves setting some time aside so that you can have some time devoted to just modeling and using these skills. So some ways that you can do this is through role play, like I've mentioned. You can also think of watching movies or video clips, cartoons for the little ones, and see how do the different characters interact. When do they pause? When do they speak over each other? And really practice some of that perspective taking through video modeling. This was the topic of one of our seminar series in the previous weeks, but it's definitely very important when talking about conversation skills as well. So there are two types of praises: unlabeled praises and labeled praises. And labeled praises can be particularly helpful when trying to shape behavior. So here's an example of a labeled praise that you could use if one of the problematic behaviors that you're noticing in your child is interrupting. So what we're always looking for when we're using labeled praises is we're looking for positive opposites, or what is the behavior that we want to see our child doing. So if we see that the problematic behavior is interrupting, the more positive opposite, or we would like to see them doing, is waiting their turn. So when they are waiting their turn, we want to catch them being good and being good as much as possible, and then specifically naming and praising them for that. So a labeled praise that could be useful to help a child wait their turn and recognize that that's something you're going to give them attention for is "Thank you for letting me speak," or "Thank you for waiting until I spoke." Or you can also use labeled praises for staying on topic and listening as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about nonverbal behaviors.
Okay, so the second half of the presentation is focused on nonverbal communication. And with nonverbal communication, this merely talks about refers to how we say things, versus where verbal communication is the words that we use to say things. So with the first way of using nonverbal communication, we'll talk about tone and volume. So oftentimes with tone and volume, you could have very similar words or the same words that can have two different meanings. So I have two examples here. So the first one being "Sam, shut the door." You can have these same exact words with different meanings to it. So first one being in a more polite, or it being portrayed in a more polite way. So for example, "Sam, shut the door." You are using more of like a neutral tone of voice, or it's being said very explicitly and direct, but still kind of providing that polite perception. Whereas you could also use the same exact words, something like "Sam, shut the door," where it's a lot more harsh, or you're raising your tone of voice, where it could be portrayed in a way that is showing that you're mad, right? So it's very important to differentiate between these two and what you're trying to portray when saying the words that you're saying. Another example is "This is great." So again, this one can also be said in, have two different meanings, although you're saying the same exact things. So if you want to portray kind of like excitement or genuineness, you can say something like "This is great." You are raising your tone of voice in the sense of using more of like a high-pitched voice and expressing genuineness and excitement for what you're saying. Whereas if it can come across as bored or sarcastic, someone might say "This is great," right? So you're lowering your voice. It kind of has like a low energy to it. So when practicing the way you use words or the way that you say words, tone and volume can definitely be something that you can practice with your children, and kind of helping them differentiate between the meanings of the words that you're saying. So for the next slide, we will talk about eye contact. So eye contact is the next rule for nonverbal communication. And essentially making eye contact lets someone know you are listening to them. So eye contact can be very important when when communicating with others. However, sometimes too much eye contact can make someone feel discomfort or uncomfortable. So for example, if you are staring into a person's eyes and you never look away, this may create discomfort in the person that you're communicating with. So it's best to make eye contact every few seconds when talking to someone. However, there may be some variety depending on the individual. So a nice little tip or something to kind of remember is that when there's silence or pauses in a conversation, that typically would be a time where it's okay to break the eye contact and look away. However, when someone is talking, it would be appropriate to maintain eye contact during those times. However, I do want to point out, just to kind of be mindful, again, that there is variety between how much eye contact someone will make and how quickly they will learn these skills or adapt to these skills. So oftentimes direct eye contact can either be overwhelming, intimidating, or even difficult, and even oftentimes painful for some people. So just keeping in mind when practicing eye contact or teaching eye contact. So for the next slide, it's personal space. So personal space is defined as the physical space immediately surrounding someone into which any invasion feels threatening to or uncomfortable for them. It's kind of like that invisible barrier you construct around yourself and don't want just anybody to pass through it. So thinking about personal space and touching others or having appropriate boundaries can be very essential when communicating with others. So for example, like where you stand when talking could be very important because it can make the other person feel more or less comfortable while talking with you. And oftentimes when someone is feeling uncomfortable when talking to you, that could create that discomfort and take away from the conversation. So thinking about that, when someone is comfortable with where you are standing, it'll be easier for that person to pay attention to what you're saying. So if you look at the picture on the slide, this it gives a nice visual of things to consider when talking about personal space or when teaching personal space. You have different types of personal space. So you have intimate, personal, social, and public. With intimate, it's okay to be a little bit closer to the individual. And with intimate, this includes people that are close family or even very close friends. Personal is, those where you're still close, but not too close, right? There's that barrier. And this could include people like friends, extended family, or if you're participating in like group discussions. And then you have social, which is the third layer. And this one is a little bit further away. This could include strangers or newly formed groups, or even acquaintances and teachers. And then lastly, the fourth layer, you have public. So with public, this also includes strangers or settings where there's a larger audience, so like a theater, lectures, or even speeches. And something to consider with the personal space is a good way to kind of teach the skill or practice the skill is having the child open their arms out wide, and kind of that is the barrier that is created, or that will let you know the distance that between you and the person that you're talking to could have, especially with those personal and social personal space areas. Okay, for the next one, we'll talk about body language and facial expressions. So with body language and facial expressions, it's important to look at what a person's body and face are telling us, because sometimes their words aren't enough for us to understand exactly what they're really saying. So for example, usually what someone says, whether it's verbally, non-verbally, or both, that really lets us know how someone may be feeling, which also allows us to understand that person a little bit better. With body language, body language is kind of like that umbrella term where facial expressions are under that, and body language refers to the nonverbal signals that we use to communicate. So there's lots of different signals within body language and facial expression. So in the eyes is a big area or a big indicator to let us know the mouth, We also have gestures. So like if someone's clenching their fist to let us know that they're mad, or they're using like a thumbs up, thumbs down to kind of communicate how they're feeling. Also arms and legs. So if someone's like crossing their arms or crossing their legs, or just positioning it in a certain way to kind of give us that nonverbal cue, as well as posture. So if someone is slouched, they might be feeling either sad, or if someone's perked up and has standing up, or their posture is more standing up, they might be happy. There's lots of different examples for these, or a lot of different emotions that let us know what the body language and facial expressions are most commonly used, but I provided 2 here. So with the first one, it's sad. Body language might include like slouching body or having their head down. And then their facial expressions might either be like crying, their eyes are getting teary, their eyes are slightly closed. And then on the opposite end, we have happy being the emotion, and the body language might be like walking tall, having your head held high, and the facial expression might be smiling or eye contact. And again, with the body language and facial expression, this one can vary across different emotions, different feelings, and also different body language and facial expressions that might be used. So even with personal space, for example, you might be able to tell that someone is feeling uncomfortable and discomfort by an invasion of personal space if they are backing up, or if they aren't making direct eye contact, and things like that, to kind of hint to us that they're giving off these cues. So for the next slide, we'll talk about whole body listening. And whole body listening is a great technique to use to practice with children. And you can follow these steps when you're practicing. And when you do practice these skills, or the following on the picture that you see on the slide, it's important to look to see what your child may already know and may already be doing, or the things that they may be struggling with and that might be harder, so that you know what needs to be worked on. Whole body listening requires great attending skills. So this is a great way to pair it with what Sabine was saying with listening, which can vary from individual as well, and not be easy for some individuals to practice these skills. However, practicing is very essential to help us get there. A good thing to consider could be that families can develop their own system of cues as a set of reminders. So like think, for example, creating like a gesture or a word or something that can be easily implemented to kind of serve as a reminder to practice whole body listening. As with other tools, like I mentioned, the abilities and developmental level of each individual really must be considered before implementing whole body listening. Some of the skills used in whole body listening, such as maintaining eye contact, staying still, or remaining quiet, are extremely difficult and could cause stress or simply not be possible for certain people. So when this is the case, it's important that adults demonstrate awareness and understanding. And when we're looking at this picture on the slide, this lays out very nicely what whole body listening is. So for example, like you listen with your shoulders and feet by turning toward the person who is talking. You listen with your chest by keeping it up and pointed toward the person who is talking. You listen with your hands by not distracting other people or yourselves, or not too much fidgeting or a lot of hand movement while the person is talking. Also listening with your ears by hearing what other people are saying. Listening with your brain by thinking about what other people are saying. Listening with your eyes, which pairs really nicely with eye contact by looking at people's faces and eyes when they are talking to you to think about how they are feeling. And then lastly, you listen with your mouth by only making comments or asking questions about what the person is talking about. And then for the next slide, this is very similar to the label praises for conversational skills. You can also provide label praises for those nonverbal communication skills that they're learning. So catch your child engaging in appropriate nonverbal cues, whether it's using eye contact, having a nice tone of voice, using the whole body listening techniques or strategies, and then praise it. So on the left of the table, you can see that these are some examples of ways to praise it. So using sufficiently positive words like I love, how, good job, thank you for, and pairing it with a behavior you like that they are doing or the behavior that you want to see more of. So on the right-hand side, you see those praisable behaviors. So for example, I love how you made such great eye contact, or good job paying attention to how I am feeling. And again, these are just examples, and there's lots of different things that you could praise when you see some type of nonverbal communication. Okay. And that's it for our presentation. I guess we can start if there's any questions or answer any questions.